Well, as Barbara said, we're trying to change how people think about young people and mental health. And I imagine every one of you in this room, in your particular organization, school, community, or country, is trying to change how we think about young people and mental health. In coming together like this, I think we're... can I walk away? I can. In coming together like this, I think we're learning from one another, but also trying to create a new story. A story that builds on all that those who've gone before us, but also that it speaks to the needs of young people now, in 2017. And in whatever particular digital or analog corner of the world they live, but we speak relevantly to them. Stories are powerful instruments of change. They open people's minds and they show them that new possibilities, new ways of doing things can happen. And they work because we're hardwired to make sense of our world through story. One of our great story makers in Ireland is Bill Whelan. His composition Riverdance exploded onto our stages and screens in 1994 and really changed not only the way we thought about Irish music, but also how we thought about ourselves. We had always, coming together around music and dance in Ireland has been a long tradition. As you can see. But by the 1960s, it had become somewhat jaded. Our music couldn't compete with Sgt. Pepper's, with Pet Sounds, with The Wall, and we became slightly embarrassed by it, all those traditional jigs and taps. Bill took these same elements. He took music, dancers, taps, and reimagined them in a new way. In the silence that followed, or preceded the applause in '94, you could feel our national self-image shifting. You know, Bill had reconnected us with some deep well of culture that we could be proud of. And I think centuries of oppression and misery and melancholy were lifted. And our self-esteem soared, and very soon our economy followed. And I blame Riverdance entirely and completely for the Celtic Tiger that ensued. I think Bill's achievements through music have resonance in our collective efforts on behalf of young people. And I believe we have something to learn from him about innovation, about change, about story. And he has kindly agreed to come and be with us this morning. So I'd like you to give a big applause to Bill Whelan. Wow. Thank you, Bill. Hearing that for the 1000th time after 20 odd years.
Yeah. It's interesting, actually, just looking at it now and putting it in the context that you put it in, Tony. I was intrigued to note that the piece that you chose before it, which is the Irish dance in Bunclody. The main differences that appear, apart from any of the work that I did and all of us did in the choreography and stuff, was that if you look at the dancers who were involved in the original, in the piece in Bunclody, it was basically community dance, and it had moved into an area which I think often took place in this hotel. I think Jean Butler took me in here once to see the Irish Dance Championships, which went on here. Irish dance existed in a part of dance culture which was basically competitive.
Yeah.
You just learned the dance and then you danced in competition with other people, and then you were marked accordingly, and it was a competitive sport, if you like.
Yeah.
And it was generally the mothers who ran the whole thing. There was the whole way that the girls were dressed and the guys were dressed. It was all mum was right at the center of that. And if you look at what the difference, apart from all the glitz and everything that went on when you're doing a show, that show was filmed in Beijing. The big difference is that dance had turned around to being something internal and community-based into something theatrical. In other words, the dancers had turned around and presented the Irish dance to the audience, whereas before that it was something which was done and continues to be done and should be done as a community activity in small halls and in various places like that. So when I look at it now, and curiously, the piece of music that they were dancing to in Bunclody, it's a piece called The Mason's Apron, and it is the only piece of traditional music that's in Riverdance. We deliberately go back towards the end of the show to that, and just to remind ourselves that everything that came out of Riverdance, even though the music might be new music, it is drawing very much on, as Tony says, on the well of what was in the culture of Irish music and dance. And that's the other little point that just to mention, looking at it now, I thought about it, that in a way, I came out of a tradition of, working with orchestras. I had become, because of my association with an Irish traditional group, Planxty, I had become quite focused on traditional music and what it meant to me. And suddenly something like I grew up, again, as you were talking about Sgt. Pepper, and I grew up in the 60s, believe it or not. And that whole thing of us connecting with international music was something that was, it was cool. It was cool. I remember when I got Sgt. Pepper first, I had it before a lot of other people because I'd really kind of taken care to order it from an English record company, and I had it. I was the most prized item in Limerick for a long time. I had this thing 2 weeks before everybody else. But that connection with the international music thing, we left our own tradition, a lot of us, and particularly those urban kids, like I was an urban kid, we left all of the sort of what was regarded as the rural culture somewhat behind, and we were much cooler if we were like, and it continues to this day. The international acts are the prize one. But what Riverdance, or what happened to me, and then what I tried to bring together with Riverdance as well, was that suddenly, when I heard the Bothy Band and Planxty and those bands first, before I joined Planxty, there was something about it that was saying, hang on, this is your culture. This is something which really belongs to you, and it speaks to you in an elemental way that many other musics don't. But now we're going to present it to you in a way that makes sense to you. In other words, we're going to use the tools of contemporary music. So like at that time it was guitars and bouzouki, which came from Greek music, and we're going to present it in a way that makes sense to your ears in the late 20th century or the mid 20th century. The music is now something that we can present, which Planxty did, and the Bothys and that. So I came out of that tradition. I came out of that sort of the group that turned in on ourselves and looked at our own culture and began to work with that basis as a way to, in my compositional work, I began to work with traditional music and instruments and put them into the orchestra. So that was the first thing. Dance still existed, as I said earlier, over here in this other territory of competition. And if Riverdance did anything, I think what it did was it brought those two forces together. There had been a movement which began with Sean O'Riordan. Those here who are Irish would know Sean O'Riordan very well. His music was again presenting an image of Ireland that we didn't have before in the orchestral medium. And it suddenly struck a chord. People heard Misha Era and they said, yeah, there's something about that that's us. That's us, we understand that. But what happened with Riverdance was that the two developments that were going on side by side with music and dance finally met. They finally met, and in a way, in a lover's kiss, they kind of met and had that moment of, look, this is Irish dance, this is Irish music, but this is it in a way that perhaps you'll understand. And I've often tried, because what's the question that I get asked most if in interview? It is, did I know when I was writing Riverdance that it was going to be the success it was? Well, what's the answer to that? Of course I did. I just put off doing it until I was 45. I mean, you don't know, and suddenly, but you have an instinct that this is something that's just for you. It's important, and I will say one thing here in this context of this conference. I believe that music, for me, saved my life many times in subtle ways. The fact that music was available to me, I was lucky enough to grow up in a house where there was a lot of music, but there were times in those dark moments in my teens when I was presented with confusing choices and didn't know where I was, and there were times even as I went along in my life when music, and I would say this, obviously I have personal relationships which are similar, but music was like another one. It was a friend that was there for me, that in times when I was very, very discombobulated about things in my life, music was there for me, and my engagement with music was something that worked at a level. It's very hard to explain it, and I'll talk in a minute about something that I'm doing at the moment, because language tends to root us a bit. Music works outside of language. At its elemental level, it works outside of language. And it is able to communicate in a way that language can't. We invent language to express thoughts, but language isn't always able to express, particularly cross-culturally, things that we feel and we don't have words for. And music is able to do that. And for me, that has been the savior of music, and it's why I am involved in, for instance, as you know, Tony, in a project called Music Generation. Yeah. And Music Generation which was begun by U2 and the Ireland Fund and funded by them, and we are now we've just announced a further expansion of the program to bring music to young people in Ireland so that they can engage with it, they can understand it, they can find in it that thing which actually can, I go so far as to say, occasionally be called upon in moments of crisis to save them, apart from the actual enjoyment of music. And it also gives them a mode of expression that, we've been down in Music Generation in various parts of the country where there are people who are already showing that they're at risk in some ways. And we've given them the opportunity, with the funds that we have been given through U2 and the Ireland Funds, to actually engage with music. And it's extraordinary. It is, apart from everything else, for all of us involved, it's a humbling and extremely emotional experience to go in and see young people who've suddenly found that life belt.
And we work with young people too, and I think in some ways what we admire so much is the way you reinvented Irish music, but also even since then are keeping yourself fresh. You keep moving. And I suppose for us, we're wondering, how do you do that? What helps you to keep fresh, to keep innovating, not to lock down. You could have retired after Riverdance in '94 and just had a perfectly happy life, like golf. But you're clearly not doing that. We're going to hear some music that you've been doing recently in a few moments. But, you know, we're all asking that question of ourselves. How do we stay fresh? How do we innovate? How do we listen?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. And one of the things, as you can probably imagine, when you do fool around, as some people see it, with or experiment, let's give it a nicer word, experiment with a known form like traditional Irish music, there are people who stand up and say, no, you can't be at that, don't touch that. That is something which is, it's fixed. And people who are fixed with fixation, or fixated with fix, however you want to look at it, they believe that there is a way, the way of doing the thing. And that is the way, and we must all follow that way. And we've seen it in every form of life, in everything from the corporate world through to religions, through to government. You know, this is the way. I think the way is only the way today. Tomorrow the way will have to be different. And the reason that traditional music, I mean, one of the things that I feel really good about traditional music is, again, looking at that clip, you know, it's slightly embarrassing, but it's true to say that many of the people who were dancing in Riverdance had the cheek not to be born when I was writing it. It makes me feel old. But at the same time, I have to say that they are now taking this, and they are, I see them, the number of young people who are working with traditional music, who are playing across a lot of different genres of music. They're being inventive with it. They're not fixed. And you will still hear, oh, no, it can't be that. It has to be in its pure, you know, show me a purist and I'll reach for my gun. I sort of feel like that. I feel that that young people should be encouraged to be inventive with the music, to be innovative with the music, and not to be affected by the tyranny of fixation.
Which is huge for us, because we need to let our young people really shape what we're doing in youth mental health.
Exactly.
And it can be a struggle, you know, for us to catch up with that.
Yes.
I'm just conscious of time, but I'm just thinking, can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing since Riverdance? Yeah.
Well, I've done a lot of different things. I've been lucky enough that Riverdance has given me an opportunity to engage with other people musically, internationally, that I mightn't have been able to beforehand. And when you make a phone call now, at least somebody answers it. And, you know, there are those kind of things which have been very gratifying. I just finished a concerto for James Galway, which we've just recorded with the National Symphony Orchestra. I do film music. I've been I seem to have been busy. And Riverdance still takes up my time. We're about to celebrate, in 2020, we're about to celebrate 25 years. So virtually nobody in the show will have been born when it was been writing, nobody. But that's fantastic. It's fantastic for us to see the young people coming in. And so I've been doing that. I've been doing lots of other things. I've been becoming a grandfather, which is a very difficult job. And then I've also been, to come back to my earlier point, I have a project at the moment which, again, I'm working with a non-linguistic musical project. That's not to say that it is, there are no voices. It is a choral project. There are a lot of voices. But I'm not using language. I'm going back to our tradition of mouth music, and it's not just us. There's mouth music everywhere. People have often sung just because they want to sing, and they don't want to sing about anything. They don't want to sing about the table or their love or their lost love or any of that. They just want to sing. And I believe that mouth music allows an opportunity to express yourself musically in a way that, the mediated form of an instrument, whatever it is out of the picture for a minute, and you're dealing directly with the human. So I've written a number of pieces of music which I'm developing into a full evening of music, and there will be some dance, but music and choral, where people where the singers will sing, but they will just sing sounds. So I'm in the middle of developing that at the moment.
Have you an example?
I have an example. I have a very early example of this, and please, we're going to play you something which has never been played in public before, and which needs work. So please respect it just within this room. Does anybody know who Bobby McFerrin is? Yeah, Bobby McFerrin is a very inventive jazz singer. He had a very big hit with the record years ago called "Don't Worry, Be Happy," which is kind of good for this room. But he and I worked together on this choral project, and I wrote a piece for him, which takes as its basis the Irish lilting as a form. And I put him together with the Irish traditional singer Liam O'Mwinley from Hothouse Flowers. And we recorded this piece that was written, I'll never forget it, I brought it in the studio, and Bobby is he's a very cool, long dreads, and he comes in and I handed him, he said, "Do you have the score of this, man?" And I said, "Yeah." So I handed him the score and he went, "Yeah." And I couldn't believe how quickly Bobby McFerrin and Liam O'Mwinley seemed to get almost immediately on the same page.
Okay.
They understood what they they each understood their own forms, and you'll hear in this. It's a short piece, but you'll hear the two of them singing together the melody that I wrote for them, and then you'll hear a little section in the middle, which I think is very important, where Bobby McFerrin goes off into an improvisation in the form of jazz, and then they come back and sing it again. So I've no title for it. It's just one of the early works on this thing. So have a listen and see what you think.
Thank you so much for